I never thought a quiet suburban street could turn into a battlefield. But here I am, staring at 35 brand new homes built right on my land. The HOA claimed it was all perfectly legal, but every rule they twisted, every fine they slapped on me, felt like a personal attack. I watched as neighbors whispered behind my back as my property was carved up without my consent. And then, in a moment of desperation, I did something I never imagined I'd do. Something that would change everything. The question is, can I really get away with it? Or have I just unleashed chaos I can't control? Before all the chaos, life on Maplewood Lane felt ordinary, peaceful, almost idyllic. I'd moved into my house 5 years ago, drawn by the wide tree-lined streets, the quiet hum of sprinklers in the morning, and neighbors who smiled as they passed by. My family and I spent weekends planting flowers, fixing up the yard, and hosting the occasional barbecue. It was a place where everyone seemed to follow the unspoken rules, where life felt manageable and predictable. Yet, beneath that calm surface, the HOA had quietly grown into a powerful force. Their newsletters hinted at stricter enforcement, new community standards, and subtle nudges about property improvements that might not meet approval. Most residents shrugged it off, but I felt a tiny knot of unease. After all, these were the same people who could impose fines for the oddest reasons, like a crooked fence or a mailbox painted the wrong shade. I never imagined that one morning, simply stepping outside to enjoy a cup of coffee would mark the start of a battle I never asked for. That's when I first noticed the surveyors across my property line, measuring, marking, preparing. It wasn't just a bureaucratic inconvenience. Something far bigger and far more personal was about to hit my life. And in that moment, I realized that the neighborhood I thought I knew, the streets I loved, had quietly transformed into a minefield, and my peaceful home might no longer be mine at all. At first, the HOA's interference was subtle, almost polite. A letter slid under my door, stamped with their official seal, warning me that my landscaping did not meet community standards. My flower beds, which had been the pride of my family, were suddenly deemed unsightly. I stared at the crisp letter, disbelief simmering beneath the surface. Surely this was a mistake. I'd done nothing different from what my neighbors had been doing for years. But then the fines began. Small at first, few $100s for misaligned mailbox, another for unauthorized exterior paint. The charges piled up, each one more arbitrary than the last. I tried to reason with the HOA board, attending meetings with my neatly documented records of compliance. Every time, I was met with polite smiles, veiled threats, and phrases like, "Rules are rules, and we expect every homeowner to follow them." It wasn't just rules. It was a test of patience and endurance, and I was quickly realizing I was on the losing side. Soon, neighbors began to change. Some who had smiled and waved now glanced past me, whispers trailing behind. Rumors circulated that I was difficult, a troublemaker, even unfit to live in this carefully curated community. I could feel the weight of judgment pressing against my doors and windows. The very people I had once called friends had become part of the machinery working against me. Each encounter with the HOA felt like walking into a courtroom with no judge, no jury, just an impenetrable wall of authority. Then came the construction. Surveyors appeared with clipboards and tape measures, marking lines that sliced through the property I had considered mine. The HOA announced they were building community housing, 35 homes planned right where my backyard used to stretch in privacy and peace. They assured me it was legal, that permits were in order, but nothing about it felt right. Every hammer, every wall rising against the sky was a reminder of how powerless I had become. The tension escalated with each passing week. Notices arrived by mail, by email, even pinned to my front door. Each document was more ridiculous than the last. Fines for leaving a trash bin in view for 30 minutes, citations for trimming my own trees, warnings about excessive noise when I mowed the lawn at noon. Every interaction was a psychological minefield. I became hyper-aware of my actions, constantly calculating how to avoid provoking another sanction. Yet no matter what I did, it seemed the rules shifted like sand beneath my feet. Late one evening, I overheard a conversation at a neighborhood gathering. Board members whispered about the lesson I needed to learn, laughter threading through the tension like a knife. It wasn't personal at first, they said. It was about maintaining order. But their eyes said otherwise. Their power had grown unchecked, and they were willing to wield it ruthlessly. I realized then that this wasn't a minor dispute. It was a battle of wills, a test of endurance, and I was right in the crosshairs. Determined not to be steamrolled, I began documenting everything: photos, videos, letters, every fine and complaint. I researched property law, HOA regulations, and loopholes in the community charter. Each discovery was a small victory, a thread of hope in a growing web of intimidation. But hope was a fragile thing. One misstep, one misunderstood email, and the HOA would pounce, slapping another fine or threat without warning. The neighbors, too, played their roles. Some avoided me entirely, while others dropped helpful hints about how the HOA could ruin lives. One morning, I discovered a chain of surveillance cameras installed along my property line. Not for safety, they claimed, but for community monitoring. Every step I took was scrutinized, every moment cataloged. The psychological toll was immense. I began losing sleep, second-guessing every decision, every gesture in my own yard. And then the board escalated further. Without warning, a notice arrived stating that parts of my property were now disputed land, and I was required to halt any construction, landscaping, or repairs until a review meeting could be held. This wasn't just harassment. It was an attempt to seize control of my land piece by piece. Anger flared, but alongside it was a creeping fear. I was trapped in a system designed to break me slowly, to chip away at my sense of ownership until I had no recourse left. The final HOA meeting was supposed to be routine, but the tension in the room felt electric. Board members sat stiffly in their seats, eyes sharp, papers stacked like weapons. Neighbors filled the back rows, whispers echoing off the walls as I walked in carrying a thick folder of evidence. My hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of everything leading up to this moment. Every fine, every threat, every sleepless night had brought me here. When the president smugly declared my violations before the crowd, I stood slowly, letting the silence stretch. Then I began reading aloud. Not my defense, but their own contradictions. HOA bylaws, state property codes, proof of improper permitting for the very houses they were building on my land. Each page hit like a hammer strike. Gasps rippled through the room as neighbors realized this wasn't just a dispute, it was a scandal. The HOA president's face flushed crimson. He tried to shout me down, claiming I was twisting the truth, but I had copies for everyone in the room. The audience leaned forward, eyes darting between me and the board. It wasn't just about my property anymore. It was about power, greed, and a board that had overstepped its authority one too many times. Then came the real bombshell, A letter from the county inspector confirming multiple code violations by the HOA itself: illegal greeting, unauthorized construction, fines, massive ones that the board would have to pay, not me. The room erupted into chaos. Neighbors shouted questions, demanding resignations. The once untouchable HOA president now sat pale and silent, his empire crumbling in front of him. As I walked out, the chatter behind me grew louder. Calls for audits, lawsuits, even a recall election. For the first time in months, I felt the crushing weight lift off my shoulders. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. There would be fallout. There always is. In the weeks that followed, the story spread beyond our little neighborhood. Local news crews showed up, cameras capturing residents demanding answers. The HOA president resigned under pressure, while remaining board members scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. County officials launched a full investigation into HOA practices, citing my case as the spark that exposed years of questionable decisions. New regulations were proposed to prevent HOAs from wielding unchecked power over homeowners. As for me, I finally rebuilt the yard the way my family wanted. No arbitrary rules, no threats of fines. My kids planted new flowers along the fence line, laughter replacing the tension that had hung over our home for so long. Eventually, a new HOA board formed, this time with real transparency, elected by the community instead of the old guard's inner circle. Meetings were open, budgets public, rules rewritten with homeowner input. I even found myself speaking at town halls, sharing my stories so others wouldn't go through the same nightmare. People from neighboring counties reached out, saying they'd faced similar battles but had been too afraid to fight back. Slowly, the neighborhood transformed. The same people who once whispered about me now stopped by with smiles, some even apologizing for believing the board's lies. It wasn't perfect, but it was finally a community again, not a kingdom ruled by fear. Standing on my porch at sunset, watching kids ride their bikes down the street, I realized the biggest change wasn't the fines or the rules, it was the shift in power. Homeowners learned they had a voice. And me? I learned that sometimes standing your ground means weathering the storm. But when the storm finally breaks, the sunlight feels brighter than you ever imagined.